I'm John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. And today I've got a special guest, Scott Ashton. He is the president and owner of Aerox, and we'll do a little bit of an introduction for Aerox a little bit later. He's also a president of his own EAA chapter. He's part of the Friends of Naples Airport. He's a CFII and a glider instructor, and he's also on the board of directors for PALS SkyHope. And I think that all of those things can be podcasts in themselves. So, Scott, I'm going to be trying to get you to come back again. But for now, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, so it's always fun to have somebody who's really involved and invested in general aviation, and just listening to some of the things that you participate in. It's cool to hear that you have a passion for GA and small airplanes and pilots in general.
Yeah, I've been flying since I was 17 years old, and I've been in the industry as an engineer and bought and sold airplanes and ran a management company and a helicopter charter company up in New York, and been heavily involved in airport advocacy through the years. And about 3 years ago, we had the chance to buy Aerox and settled down here in Naples, Florida, and loving it. And just bought a Mooney 201. So after about 20 years of being in flying clubs, I'm now an aircraft owner too.
That's awesome. And you were telling me before we started that you had a weekend of flying, so that's pretty cool.
I did. Yeah. We went up to Tampa to go visit my daughter, and, GA at its best, and went up and saw her and had dinner. It was really nice.
Yeah. So I'd be remiss to not say this publicly. And I know that we thanked you in the past, but you were a supporter of the NAFI giveaways that we had at AirVenture in the Professional Development Center. And we just wanted to take a moment to recognize that we appreciate it. And I know that our members appreciate your support as well.
Well, thanks, John. I mean, that's part of the Aerox ethos is we're very supportive of all of these efforts in the community, and to support scholarship winners and raffles, wherever we can, to support organizations like NAFI that are doing great work on behalf of general aviation. So happy to do it, and you can expect support this year again as well.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, we keep mentioning Aerox. Can you tell me a little bit about what is Aerox? What do you guys do, and what's your mission?
Aerox is oxygen made easy. So everything to do with aviation oxygen. We're kind of unique in this space in that we've got a production program. So we sell installed oxygen systems for Diamond and Globe and the Leonardo 609 tilt rotor. So a wide variety of applications. We sell portables through Aircraft Spruce and Sporties. So if you're a light GA pilot and you want a portable installed system, we have a wide variety of options for you. We also have TSO approved oxygen masks that are certified for use up to 40,000 feet. Oxygen cylinders with PMA oxygen cylinders for installed applications. We do EMS applications. So a pretty wide variety of applications, all focused around general aviation, business aviation, and helicopters and EMS.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, oxygen's kind of an important thing. We use it every day, so making sure that you are properly oxygenated while you're flying is certainly a big deal.
Our tagline is "It's toxic to be hypoxic." So flying with hypoxia is equivalent to flying with any impairment, and there's an easy fix for it, and that's to throw on a cannula and use some oxygen. Really, we teach the science is to use that we should be using oxygen above 8,000 feet.
Yeah, and that's kind of where all this comes from. You and I were speaking last week, and our main goal, and I think yours is as well, is to educate pilots and flight instructors to understand not just how to do their jobs better, but maybe things that aren't covered in kind of the general educational process. And we started talking about common misconceptions amongst the pilot community of oxygen in general, when you need it, when you don't need it, what you should be using when you do need it. And that's kind of where the idea of this whole get together for the podcast episode came from. So let's talk a little bit about common misconceptions for aviation oxygen. What are these things that you have come across?
There are a lot of misconceptions about oxygen, and I'm also a FAAST Team rep, and so I do safety seminars. I'm doing a safety seminar at Sun and Fun this year. I'm doing them at Oshkosh, and really, it was kind of easy putting together the safety seminar because you stand at the booth and people come up and they ask you questions, or they call into our customer service line and ask questions. And basically, the presentation that I put together was just answering all of the questions that we get through all of our various sources. So let's start off, since we're all flight instructors or have an affinity towards flight instructors here listening to the podcast. Let's start off with 91-211, right? Which is oxygen is required anytime you're above 12,500 feet for more than 30 minutes, or anytime that you're above 14,000 feet, and you have to give it to your passengers. You have to make it available to your passengers if you're above 15,000 feet. So that's what we teach in the regulations. That's what, as flight instructors, we're teaching our students in order to pass our FAA written. Mm-hmm. So the law of primacy, right? We know the law of primacy tells us that what we learn first, we learn best. So student pilots learn that I don't need oxygen until I get to 12,500 feet, right? And so the misconception is that that's based in some physiological basis, and it's not. If you go back to the Federal Register, all the way back to 2000 or 1970, when this law was put on the books, there was a lot of discussion in the public comment. The reason why you don't need oxygen below 12,500 feet by regulation is so that you can go west to east or east to west across the Rockies without having to get an oxygen system. That's the only reason it's 12.5. It is not based on anything to do with physiology. Part 135 requires oxygen above 10,000 feet, not 12.5. And EASA regulations are also 10,000 feet. So the only place in the world where the requirement for oxygen is 12,500 feet is our Part 91-211. So it's interesting. So students learn that, and then as you progress through your private pilot career and through your flying career, you think, oh, well, I don't fly above 12,000 feet, therefore I don't need oxygen. And that is a huge misconception. And we show a chart in my seminars of blood oxygen concentration, which is the measurement for that is so ubiquitous now. If you've got an iWatch or a Fitbit or something, you can. It's very easy now to measure pulse oximetry, and right around between 7,500 and 9,000 feet, your pulse oximetry is going to cross that critical 90% threshold. And if you're in the hospital at 90%, they're putting you on oxygen. You're considered critical. And yet, we can fly at 10,000 feet all day long, and your pulse oximetry will be at that 90% level, and you have to make decisions. You've got to get ready for an approach. You're flying instruments. You may have to deal with an emergency. And by definition, at 10,000 feet, you're probably flying impaired, and the effects accumulate over time. So if you're cruising up at that altitude and then you go to shoot the approach, you're fatigued, you're wiped out, and you've got this brain fog, and now you're ready to shoot the approach, and you're not as sharp as you should be. So that's probably the number one misconception that we deal with is pilots. Whenever I tell them that we're in aviation oxygen, they're like, "Oh, I fly, I don't fly above 10,000 or 12,500 feet, or I live on the East Coast. I'm not out in the mountains." Well, I'm down here in Florida, and we're up at 10,000 feet as often as we can get because it's cooler up there. So when it's 95 degrees here, on the Southwest Florida, we can go up to 10,000 feet, and it's 50, 40 degrees, and it's fantastic. The air is smoother, and you get a lot less traffic. So there's plenty of reasons to fly as high as possible, between 8 to 10,000 feet for general aviation pilots. So I would say that's probably the number one misconception that we deal with, and we spend a lot of time and energy trying to educate pilots that that aviation oxygen is something that everyone should have, even just a small cylinder with them, in the airplane, just to just in case they've got to go up to altitude or at night if you're flying above 5,000 feet.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. So you advocate above 5,000 feet at night and above 8,000 feet during the day. You should probably have oxygen.
Yep. Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely.
Okay.
O2 over 8 feels great, and above 5,000 at night. If you're an instructor and you're teaching your students night flying, you can take them up with a small oxygen system, and as you go up in altitude, your night vision will constrict, and then you'll go on that oxygen, and all the colors will really sharpen it and brighten it. It's really remarkable when you do that. And then also, everybody's hypoxia symptoms are different. So one of the other things that we encourage every pilot to do is to go through the FAA training in the PRO, which is the Portable Reduced Oxygen Training Enclosure. And what they do is they mix nitrogen into the air to reduce the oxygen partial pressure. And they'll simulate an altitude. They won't. So it's not done by depressurizing the enclosure, is what my point is. Mm-hmm. But what they'll do is they'll simulate an altitude of, say, 25,000 feet, and you've got to sit there with a pad of paper doing math problems and and measuring your pulse oximetry. So as you're going up in altitude, you can feel the effects of hypoxia and what it does to you, because everybody's hypoxia symptoms are different and it affects everybody differently. So I encourage you to go do the PRO, whether it's at Sun and Fun or Oshkosh. They changed the regs, so you can do the PRO now with basic med, whereas a few years ago you couldn't do it with basic med. You had to have a third class, and now you can do it with basic med, which I think is fantastic on the FAA's part, that they recognized that they needed to do that. So I would get, as soon as you get to one of those shows, I would get on the list and do the PRO. It's really, it's eye opening about how hypoxia affects you. It also will affect you differently from flight to flight. So it's affected by fatigue, hydration, smoking, a number of different factors that may change from flight to flight. So on one flight you may be fine at 10,000 feet. Another flight, you're kind of fatigued, and you're suffering from hypoxia at 8,000 feet.
Mm. It's neat. I didn't know they brought those to the show. I've never tried that.
PRO?
Yeah. Our at the university I graduated from, they've got one of those pressure chambers that you can go into, but I haven't seen the nitrogen systems. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, because it's inert, so it's easy to do, and it's easy to reduce the partial pressure of oxygen. So it's an easy way to simulate altitude without depressurizing a chamber, which is really expensive and requires a lot of safety. A lot more safety equipment.
My only issue is if they start asking us math problems, they may think I'm hypoxic before I even start. So I've got to get a baseline first.
They're very easy. They're very easy math problems, and you'd be amazed at how hard they are to do when you're severely hypoxic.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think, again, when we're studying as private pilots, even up through flight instructors, we talk about, okay, it's got to be aviation grade oxygen. And we know that you can't use the same kind of oxygen as you would for, say, welding or something like that. But what makes aviation oxygen specific? What makes it special? Why is it different?
So all oxygen is produced the same way. All oxygen is produced from it's produced from a cryogenic, basically it's a cryogenic factory. So they freeze the air and they liquefy the oxygen and drain it off, and it's ultra pure oxygen. So all oxygen, whether it's welding, medical, or aviators breathing oxygen, are all made the same way. So basically the gas that you're getting is the same no matter what grade of oxygen you're getting. There used to be this misconception that medical oxygen had moisture in it, because the moisture, and I don't think the FAA realized this until a few years ago, the moisture is added at the point of delivery. So there's nebulizers at the point of delivery in the hospital, in the doctor's office, where the moisture is added to the oxygen. It's not added to the oxygen at the factory. So it leaves the factory all the same. There's some different requirements with regard to testing the cleanliness of the cylinders that the various types of oxygen are put into. And then obviously there's different testing requirements and certification requirements for the various grades of oxygen, but they're all made the same way and they all meet the most stringent requirements. And in fact, the reality is that if you know welding at all, if there's any welders, any impurities in either the oxygen or the acetylene when you're welding will ruin the weld. So when you think about all the crap that we breathe in as human beings, all of that would ruin the weld. So, it's all produced the same. They're certified differently. And, obviously we recommend using aviators breathing oxygen, but there's a lot of people who use welding oxygen or divers oxygen and with no ill effects. But if you're flying, if you're Part 135 or something like that, your op specs are going to require aviators breathing oxygen. And when we fill our cylinders, we only use aviators breathing oxygen.
Sure. Yeah. I guess that in itself is sort of a misconception that there are differences. So that's interesting.
Yeah. The biggest one is about the medical oxygen having moisture put in it. That's been a common misconception, and it's never been true. And, it was one of those things that got started a long time ago. And, it's simply just not true.
Yeah.
The other question we get asked a lot is how do you fill your oxygen cylinder? And, what we recommend, honestly, the easiest way to do it is to set up a cascade in your hangar. You can rent cylinders from Airgas or one of the industrial gas suppliers. They'll rent you or lease you a couple of aviators breathing oxygen cylinders, and you can set up a 2-cylinder cascade with a high cylinder and a low cylinder, low pressure and high pressure, and fill your oxygen cylinder for really for pennies on the dollar. It's very economical, very inexpensive. There's probably some requirements, to keep it stored in your hangar. They should be chained up so they don't tip over or in a stand. So you want to follow all of the safety protocols, but it's very easy to set up and very easy to fill either your cylinder, or if you have an installed system, you can fill up your airplane right from that same setup. If you're traveling, it's a little bit more difficult. An FBO will charge you anywhere between $50 and $150, depending on what FBO you go to. What I recommend to people is they find a maintenance shop on the field and go to a maintenance shop and see if they've got an oxygen setup and have them do it, and you'll save a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And plan ahead.
I used to fly for 135, and of course, one of our things during the initial walk around is checking the oxygen system and making sure that you're not low. And many times I have had to go back into the FBO and go, hey, is there a guy on the field that does this? And out of experience, for those of you that are doing this, check that early, because sometimes that guy can be busy. It might take an hour or two before he's able to show up and refill your cylinder, but it's certainly worth doing, of course.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And the other thing, people ask about what size cylinders. I always recommend getting the largest cylinder you can reasonably fit in your airplane for exactly that reason. It just gives you more endurance.
Yeah. So one of the other misconceptions that came up during our initial conversation, and frankly, I didn't even know that this was a thing, but I sort of understand it now that I have done a little bit of research on my own end. Apparently, there's a misconception amongst pilots that you can bring sort of oxygen cans. Isn't it the kind of thing that people use when they're like hungover or something?
Yeah.
But you can use these oxygen cans.
Yeah, we get asked about that a lot at our booth when we're at the shows. That they use these little one breath oxygen cans, and as someone who flies a lot and it flies at high altitude, I, I just don't think they're effective. For a number of reasons. We have a really interesting blog post about it, 5 reasons why oxygen in a can is a can't for pilots. And I use the analogy. It's like trying to fly your airplane with, with your mags on only 1 second at a time. So you take a breath of oxygen from the can, and in 2 or 3 seconds the effects are gone. And you really need it. You really need it on a continuing basis if you're up at altitude. The effects come quickly, but they also go away quickly. And you don't know how much you have left. It's much more difficult to use because you've got to hold it up to your face when you're using it. So, I guess if you're climbing a mountain or something and you need a little hit or something like that, it's fine. But it's definitely not a substitute for either a portable or an installed oxygen system. And they're a little difficult to transport because they're considered hazmat, so you can't ship them. You can't ship them very easily. So there's just a number of difficulties with them, and they're not really appropriate for use for aviation needs.
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't even familiar with what these were when you originally mentioned it. It literally, like you said, it's an oxygen in a can, and people just breathe it in and then it's gone. What are these for to begin with?
They're I guess they sell much more into the consumer market. So, I guess they sell into like football teams and runners and much more general consumer type markets where, you're at sea level, but you may need a little hit of oxygen to kind of refresh your brain or something. They're really not meant for extended use. You can't, because it's a gas, you really can't tell how much is in there. So, if you're using it up at altitude and you're taking a hit of it every few minutes, you could run out and not even know it. You can't refill them. And, like I said, they're hard to use because you have to hold it up to your face. So you're trying to brief an approach or something and fly the airplane and manage everything else. And, now you've got to manage this as well. So, it's just, to me, it's it's interesting. It's a little niche thing, but it's definitely not a substitute if you're flying with any kind of regularity. You're much better off with a small portable oxygen system, just keeping it in your flight bag rather than this O2 in a can.
Yeah, if there's one thing that aviation is not kind to, it's shortcuts. And that's kind of what this feels like. I mean, I really enjoyed your blog post. And as you said, it's 5 reasons why oxygen in a can is a can't for pilots, which I love the title. And you mentioned in already the idea that, hey, you don't know how much you have left. You don't know how much you're actually absorbing. What happens when you run out, because it is a short burst of oxygen. And then you even say here that there's a certain percentage of it that isn't even oxygen to begin with. So it's all of those things and more, including, I'm sure, lack of regulation and its intended use not being for airplanes. Why this whole thing is a bad idea. So yeah, I encourage anybody to go on the Aerox website, and it's aerox.com, and check out some of these other blog posts, because there's some really good stuff in here for educational materials for instructors looking to show this to students.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, being an instructor myself, the presentations that I do are really geared with that instructor mindset, in mind. So one of the presentations I did was all of the things that your instructor didn't teach you about using aviation oxygen. I know actually through all of my flight training, the use of oxygen, other than learning the regulations, the use of oxygen never came up, and it was always like this mysterious thing about what kind of connectors do I use and where do I where do I get it filled, and So we've tried to answer as many of those questions as possible and to take some of that mystery out of using, buying, refilling your aviation oxygen system, no matter whose system you use, whether it's ours or Mountain High's or anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
To us, it's important that you use the system and get the best benefit out of it, because it is a safety enhancement.
So if somebody's looking to kind of get into something like this, let's say they own their own airplane, they're like, hey, I fly above 8,000 all the time. What does it take to get started on a system? What's kind of a basic entry level place?
Yeah, we sell, we sell 1, 2, 4, and 6 place systems. So depending on what size airplane you have or how many users you have, you can pick the number of users that you have. Then you pick your cylinder size, and there's there are letters there. So there's A, C, D, E, and M, and it goes anywhere from 9 cubic feet up to 24 cubic feet. And we have a chart, an endurance chart, that tells you how many hours of use you get at a given altitude versus cylinder size. So like an A cylinder at 10,000 feet, may last 12 hours. You can get an E cylinder at that same altitude that'll last 45 hours, say. So, you can pick the cylinder size that makes the most sense for you. And then there's a number of options. We just came out with a conserving boom cannula called the Boomula, and that mounts to your headset it's got a special Bose A20 mount, and it also has a conserving pendant, and ours is the only one that has that. So you can use it with any installed or portable oxygen system, and you'll get the benefit of that conserving feature. And then the final thing is a pulse oximeter. Every pilot should have a pulse oximeter in their flight bag. They're so ubiquitous now, and they're pretty inexpensive. We sell them at the trade shows, and you can buy them on Sporties or Aircraft Spruce. And really, use that to understand what your body's doing. It's like an engine monitor for your body. And if you get down below that, that 90, 92 mark, you either descend or you should be throwing your oxygen on.
As far as the oxygen level in your blood degrading, I mean, I know we talked a little bit about the whole 12.5 thing and the half an hour thing. Is where did they come up with the half an hour? Is there any science behind that? Should somebody be using a different number, do you think?
Well, I use it as soon as I cross 8,000, I can feel it right away. So I throw it on. Again, that half hour thing was really, that all really came out of being able to cross the country without having an oxygen system on. So, the effects do accumulate over time. So if you're at that 8,000 feet, you're just going up because New York ATC puts you up at 7,000, crossing the class Bravo all the time if you're VFR. So if you're up there for 30 minutes, it's you're probably going to be okay because you're coming back down. But if you're going to be cruising at that altitude for any extended period of time, I would definitely be throwing the oxygen on. And again, measure your pulse oximetry. There's plenty of YouTube videos, and we've done some with Aviation Consumer and a couple of others that show that 8,000 foot mark is really critical. It's pretty dramatic how that curve crosses between 8 to 10,000 feet, not 12.5. By 12.5, right. You're in the mid 80s. By 12.5, you're in the mid 80s.
Interesting. Yeah. I just get this picture in my head of somebody, trying to cross the Rockies in an old Piper, just measuring the time of how long it took him to get, across the tallest peak. Oh, that's got to be it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it also depends on your level of adaptation to it too. So people, we get people telling us, "Oh, I live in the East Coast, so I don't need an oxygen system." Well, the reality is, being down here in Florida at sea level, I need it more than anybody, because when I go up to altitude, I have zero tolerance for altitude. If you live out, if you are in the mountains or you live out in the Rockies, at least you've built up a tolerance, 5,000, 6,000 feet. So you've been exposed to it, and your body's kind of acclimatized to it. As an East Coaster, as someone at sea level, my body is not acclimatized to high altitude at all. So again, a pretty common misconception. It's actually the reverse. If you live out in the West Coast or out in the Rockies, you need it because you're going up to higher altitudes, but your body's also acclimatized to it a little bit better than me here at 4 feet or 5 feet at our shop in Bonita Springs right now. And like I said, I'm up at altitude all the time. So,
yeah, that's really interesting. So I think that there's a lot we can cover, and we're not going to do it all today. But I think we've got enough time for maybe one more misconception, if you can think of one. What else do people ask?
The only real misconception is, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of small misconceptions, but the general one is that it's complicated. It's not complicated. That you can get a kit, whether it's from us or any of the other providers, comes with everything you need. You put it together, you put the cannulas on or the mask, and you use it. It's not that complicated. You follow the instructions, and it's very easy to use. It's small, it's lightweight. So we encourage everybody to have at least a small portable oxygen system on board. It doesn't take up a lot of weight, it doesn't take up a lot of space, and it's not hard to use. So that's really the other big misconception, is that it's somehow this mysterious thing that only the big boys use, or only someone with a high performance airplane can use. Hey, if you're flying a 172, ATC can put you up at 8 just like that. And throw it on and you'll feel so much better. I can't tell you how many long distance cross country flights I've done at 10,000 feet, where I go home and just completely wiped out, and I sleep for hours. When you're on oxygen, you land and you feel great. And that's the other big thing, is after the flight, you just feel so much better after flying using oxygen compared to not using it.
Well, as with so much in aviation, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Yep, for sure.
So, all right. Well, I think that certainly is some great information for our listeners. And again, listeners, if you're interested, do your research. There's so much out there beyond what we teach for the check rides. And again, the Aerox website has a lot of good information. I'm sure there's some other good information out there as well. But Scott, I appreciate you coming in and sharing these ideas with us today. And again, I hope you come back and maybe share us some more.
Sure thing, John. And thanks for everything that NAFI's doing for the flight instructor and general aviation community. We appreciate it.
Fantastic. And remember, aerox.com.